Welcome to the latest session. Welcome to the latest session of the California Library Advocacy Series, the Ursula Meyer Advocacy Fund Training Series, done through the California Library Association. We have one slide and one slide only so that you know that we're going to be talking to each other rather than looking at slides during the show, but this is a real important one. This explains who we are, what we do, and how to see some of the previous episodes that we've had that are now on YouTube. I'm going to stop talking long enough for you to skim this. The slide will go down and then we really start. And if that wasn't enough time for you to read it, you can always just pause there and go back and read that. But we're going to take that down and say, welcome. Happy to see you here. When we talk about advocacy and we talk about connecting with different groups, oftentimes we forget that as advocates, we are not alone. And that's the point of today's session through this Ursula Meyer series. We have Tom and Deborah who have extensive experience in advocacy. You have me who potentially have extensive advocacy experience, having worked with CLA quite a while now running this program. And we also have the stories that come to us through the different organizations we're with. I think back when I think about advocacy as something that was really strongly felt here in San Francisco at a time when budgeting was tough, when positions were tough to maintain through city county budgets. And there was a lot of discussion about how are we going to keep our libraries going. So let's bop back temporarily, put ourselves in a frame of mind of 1993, I think it was, right, Deborah? That's when we had our initial ballot initiative to get funding set. It's one thing to put a ballot proposal out there saying we're going to guarantee a library this amount of money. It's an entirely different thing to put together the coalition that has to do that. And it was interesting in San Francisco that where we had library lovers and we knew we needed 66%, 66 plus whatever little percentage takes us above the 2/3 vote to get that initiative passed. We had a whole coalition, friends of the library, library staff, library administration. We had volunteers that worked with us to get the message out. We had a professional pollster that was looking at things. And it would get kind of crazy at times. We'd say, all right, it looks like everybody favors some kind of a fund that would support libraries so we get more hours, more materials, and that we can better serve our community. But then we start seeing things like, well, if it's a property tax, property owners might not want to support this, where apartment dwellers might want to do it. And we had to work through a lot of different things like that. And that's going to be the point of what we talk about today, how you draw the different organizations that are already in place and are already drawn together by a common goal. In this case, adequate funding for a library system that needed better funding than what it had, and build the long-term relationships by working together and ignoring the boundaries, ignoring the natural barriers that might keep us apart, and look for the things that draw us together. I'm going to start this off by turning to Deborah, who's a longtime colleague through San Francisco Public and many other things where I've known her, and ask Deborah to start talking about one of the organizations she's with. And I'm going to circle back and talk a little bit about California Library Association, and have Tom come in and talk about the California School Library Association. So Deborah, starting from the basics, describe what your organization does, telling us a story that illustrates how that organization successfully engages in advocacy, so people participating in today's session could go, oh yeah, I can do that too.
I certainly will, but I also want to tack on something to your San Francisco story. One of the groups that we almost forgot about were the unions, and the unions were incredibly important. So looking up and looking at the relationships, I think, is such an incredibly important part. So today wear several hats, but today I've got my California Public Library Advocates hat on. And it was an organization that was originally started as a group of trustees in California. It's been around for a long time, and there was a Friends of California Libraries also. The two organizations kind of merged. And then we decided that we wanted to be about California Public Library Advocates all over the place. So we changed our name, we changed our logo, all that thing. But what we're trying to do is help libraries make sure that they reach out to the advocates in the community. And they can be other librarians, they can be trustees, they can be commissioners, they can be friends, they can be all kinds of things. They can also be politicians, they can be people, they can be groups, they can be and so what we in the years that we have existed, a number of years ago, California librarians would go up to Sacramento during budget season and lobby. And so we would host a gathering and that sort of thing. We're not doing that these days, and certainly COVID has put the kibosh on that sometimes. Although we still call the representatives. We also have done a lot of regional training. We invite we usually ask a library to host us, or a library thinks that they have an issue on their mind, and so CPLA can come in and do, say, a morning Saturday session with a number of speakers on various things. And we can do anything from how to teach somebody how to write an email to a legislator, to how to maintain a good relationship, a long-term relationship with a legislator, with one of their staff members, that sort of thing. And usually we focus on California legislative stuff, and it could be local, it could be statewide. We like to stay at the statewide often, but we know that the local is connected to the state is connected to the national, and the dollars flow all the way down. The federal dollars flow through the state, then flow through regional, flow through, and not everybody knows that. And so our job is, from Advocacy 101 and from Libraries 101 for people who are newly on their trustee list, to library directors who may have switched jobs, they may have a different size library, they may have, they may go from a library that has one friends group to a library that has 13 friends groups. And then what do you do? So we're always happy to help, and we're about to start doing our regional workshops again. Usually we do a northern, a southern, and we can also do a central California one as well. So that's what CPLA is about.
For people watching this rather than being in the live version, can you tell them how to contact your organization?
Certainly. We have a website. It's CaliforniaPublicLibraryAdvocates.org. Sometimes we have a slide with our telephone numbers. You can email me. I am at Zorrah, ZORRAH @gmail.com. That's ZORRAH @gmail.com. Always happy to talk about it.
Thank you very much. Tom, let's switch over to the school libraries. What's your organization doing, and what are some of the success stories that you could share with people today in a way to inspire them as to what they can do?
Yeah, so CSLA is the organization of professional librarians and paraprofessionals that work in school libraries. And it's interesting that in this state, as far as I know, we never had a joint organization. In many states, there's like a library association, and school libraries are part of that. But in California, we celebrated our 100th anniversary, maybe five or more years ago now. So we were started in the early part of the 20th century, and actually started in, I believe, Pasadena. And so we've been around for a while, and I've been involved, for many years. And we have had certainly our successes in advocacy, as well as our failures. You may or may not know that California, excuse me, is one of the has one of the lowest ratios of school libraries and school librarians to students in the entire country. So although the law says that schools have to provide library services, that is not defined. And I can give you a perfect example of that. I was in a school district with 3 comprehensive high schools, and they each had a school librarian and at least 1 clerical staff for all the years that I was there. And after I left, things started to deteriorate. It's always because of budget issues. So currently that school district, which is in a very prosperous area, Marin County, Southern Marin County, has 1.5 position as a librarian, and that serves to fulfill the understanding of the law. so that all of the school libraries are actually run by clerks or paraprofessional people. And this one person who's also a math teacher, sort of is the official librarian for the district. I don't know how she does it, frankly. But at any rate, many districts are like that, and many districts actually have no professional librarian at all. Sometimes they, get some help from the local public library systems or other ways. But if there was ever an audit done, and it's one of the things I've advocated for many years, some parent has got to sue the state or the district over the lack of library services. But at any rate, the California School Library Association many years ago decided that they needed some kind of a person, a staff person at the state level to represent school libraries. And after, I don't know, many years, we're able to actually get such a person who works for the Department of Education, and is also, it's a broader portfolio, I guess, than libraries. Also has to do with textbooks and that sort of thing, but still part of their duties are to represent school libraries in the Department of Education. The other thing that I will mention is that there are there are standards for all subjects in California. Now, grant you, many of these standards haven't been updated in more than 10 years, but nevertheless, I'm talking about social studies, science, math, all of the subjects that are taught in school. And there wasn't one for library programs. So that was another thing that we worked on. We worked on getting model school library standards written. And that was a long process. I can remember sitting in the Board of Education meetings when they finally passed or accepted the model school library standards. We worked with a lot of different people to come up with those, starting with American Association of School Libraries, which had its own standards and still does. We developed some that we thought were appropriate for California. So that was done more than 10 years ago. And we're right now working on actually the possibility of updating those standards. So, these things, why do we do these things? Well, because if there are no standards and if there is no one in the state office advocating for libraries, then libraries tend to be forgotten. It's one of those things that everybody knows what a library is. Everybody has, well, in California, fewer and fewer kids have actually experienced a school library. But in the old days, there were many more school libraries, and many people, sort of think they know what they are and so forth, but they don't just continue to exist because we remember the way they were. It's a constant battle, a constant struggle. And so having these tools at our disposal helps us to put them into the eye of the legislators and bureaucrats and administrators and so forth that are responsible for the libraries.
Tom, a lot of what you've talked about focuses on the results, which is the question I posed to you. Let's take it a step deeper here, because what we really want to look at, especially for the audience we're trying to reach here, is how do you actually do that? Can you think of something that you or your colleagues did to reach out to a segment of your community or to another organization that made your effort more successful than it would have otherwise been?
So I guess one of the major things the California School Library Association has for many years had a lobbyist, Jeff Frost, who some of you know, and all the years that I've been involved in the organization, he has been our lobbyist. And so he's the one who kind of knows and kind of informs us of the types of things that we need to do in order to get legislators, especially, on our side. In the days when we had the face-to-face meetings in legislators' offices, we were always there along with the public librarians and various other librarians, especially when I worked in Marin County. You know, we every year basically had some kind of a meeting, either with the legislator or with his staff, and made our interests known. The other thing about school libraries is that they're local, like public libraries are, and so we need to convince the local people that they're worth fighting for. In several districts around the state, they have passed special tax codes that give support to libraries specifically. One example of that is in Berkeley. One of the reasons that Berkeley, most Berkeley schools have a library and a librarian is that several years ago, people got out there and worked on passing a special tax that some of which the funds went to supporting libraries. I believe the same thing is true in West Contra Costa County. In Oakland, I worked with the Friends of the Oakland Public School Libraries, and they had also a special tax, some of which was to go to libraries, some of which was to go to support arts programs and some other things. And for many years, libraries got very little of that money. Let's say it was $15 million. And the Friends of the Oakland Public School Libraries actually used to go to the meetings of the group that it was called Measure G, that oversaw how those funds were spent. And we just kept going, and every time we go, we would point out that, well, why aren't libraries getting more of this money? And eventually it got to the point, and now where about half of the funds are going to support libraries in the district. And I was involved with that group for about 10 years. And so libraries are much better supported now than they were when I first got started with the group. So these are some examples of the kinds of things that not just CSLA, but other school library related people have gotten involved with.
Thank you, Tom. You've given me a perfect segue to get back into California Library Association and how that fits into this whole landscape. The association, like what Tom just described, does have or not full-time, but a permanent advocate working with the association on behalf of libraries up and down the state to reach the legislature. That person works very closely with the CLA committee that is an advocacy and legislation committee. The committee identifies, based on what you tell them are your needs, your aspirations, your ideas for advocacy throughout the state, and a whole list is put together of the items that we will focus on for a given year. Those evolve year by year, but there is a regularity to them, a steadiness of them, because these things don't get handled in 1 year by themselves. This means that if you're an advocate out there and you're trying to figure out where to start, you've got Tom's organization, you've got what Deborah's been talking about, you've got what Tom alluded to, and I want to return to that in a minute with Deborah, Friends of the Library organizations that are so important, because Deborah's done a lot of work at that level. But at California Library Association, if you're looking for your peeps and you want to know how to get involved, that's the group that can take you in and can work with you. Now, you will not be working directly with the lobbyists, as the lobbyist has to be focusing on the direct work with the legislature, but your ideas and your needs filter up through that committee to that lobbyist who's done tremendous work over a long period of time. There were two of them for the longest time, a father-daughter team. The daughter recently took over the whole business, or that part of it, for us when her father retired after many, many years of successful work. And we seem to be going strong. So again, you cannot hear often enough from a brief introduction like this. you have associations out to help you. The biggest challenge for you is to figure out which one or which group of those can work most closely with you to put together the kind of coalition you need to meet the needs of your libraries, your communities, and the extended communities that you serve in what is now basically a global library consortium, thanks to the internet drawing us all together. Let's circle back for a minute. Deborah, you've been involved at the local San Francisco Friends of the Library. I know you're on the Library Commission in Sonoma County. You've done work through the American Library Association and with Friends organizations nationally. What can you tell people who are not familiar with Friends organizations in terms of the resources that are available to them at that level? You're muted, unfortunately. This is our trick to make sure that
Okay.
you get to say something a second time just because you didn't like it the first time.
I was trying to be good and make sure that everybody heard Tom instead of, my coffee cup. Friends, there are a variety of different kinds of friends all over California and all over the United States, but what they know how to do is work together. If they're given the opportunity also. And so what CPLA can do is those regional workshops that I told you about. They can bring friends groups who may not know each other very well. And I'll give you a specific example from Sonoma County. So I moved up from San Francisco, one friends group, one library, lots of branches, and to Sonoma County a few years ago. And there is one Sonoma, a freestanding JPA, Joint Powers Agreement library, but each town that was a part of the JPA has a friends group, and the friends group are very focused on their own libraries, not surprisingly. So when COVID hit, it was and so things were a little uncertain in the beginning, but then the library started hosting Zoom meetings for the presidents of the friends groups. And so then the friends groups started having Zoom meetings because this was not all of them were familiar with the technology. And so now the friends groups are talking together, and dare I say, they may be working together. And that will be good for the system as a whole, I say, as the someone who's on the library commission. It takes the need, I think. It also takes a message from libraries, and Pat can probably talk. I mean, she's got a very sophisticated system down in San Diego, and I'm sure that they're enormously fond of their foundation. But it's if the library only encourages the friends group to sell books, then that's what they're going to do. If a library invites its friends to talk to the legislators or encourages them to talk to the legislators, and says, this is what we need, this is our strategic plan, this is what we need, this is what the budget is, and this is what we're hoping for in terms of state dollars or in terms of grant money, or not given permission, but I think some systems really focus internally on those kinds of conversations. And if you leave your friends out, or you leave your foundation out of those conversations, you are missing a wild opportunity to make a lot of contacts and a lot of money. because the friends know people, and the foundation members know people, and so making sure that the people that the library staff knows and the people that the foundation staff knows at all levels, having the conversation about strategically what is best for the system and what is best for the community, I think is a very interesting thing. I don't know if I was all over the map there, Paul, for you, but
Deborah, you gave me just enough that I can latch onto something and say, this is
there you
exactly
go.
what we're trying to do in a session like this. You've now heard the basic introductions of the groups that we publicized we were going to be talking about today, and then we went a little further by talking about the friends groups. But what we often forget in advocacy, especially when we're looking at different organizations that are out there, is how do we reach out to them? Let me give you an example, a very brief example of what I think is a bad way that people reach out. I might call Tom, or I might call Deborah and say, hey, can you come in and let's have a town hall meeting? Let's talk about what you're doing and how we can get people involved. In the bad scenario, Tom or Deborah would get up and they'd speak for 55 minutes. And then there'd be one question. They go, oh, we're out of time now. We got to run. That would be the end of it. Not the spirit of a town hall. What we really try to do, what we're doing in this session, as you're about to feel for those of you that are live in the session, is that we get together and we lay out some groundwork, and then we really have a conversation around what are our common needs? What do we need to know to work together? So that in mind, when Deborah mentioned that Pat Wilson, who's on the call as one of our co-conspirators in learning here today, she mentioned she's got a beautiful system there. Pat, if you're willing, would you talk a little bit about your group, what you do, and perhaps a success story you've had by reaching out and collaborating with another group?
Well, sure.
Nothing like being put on the spot, right?
That's right.
Nobody's watching.
Yeah.
It's just among friends.
Right. Let me preface this by saying I am not an employee of the Library Foundation in San Diego. Yeah, we used to be San Diego Public Library Foundation, but now we're Library Foundation SD, so I get all confused. But I am the immediate past chair of the board of the trustees of the
Excellent.
Library Foundation. I'm also on the board of the Friends of the San Diego Public Library Foundation, Friends of the San Diego Public Library. So I'm involved in both the Friends and the foundation, and I'm not on the commissioner. I'd have the trifecta, but we all work very closely together intentionally. It's been an intentional building up of these relationships between the commission and the Friends and the foundation, such that we have Libraries Transform SD, which is our advocacy sort of face as with the Friends and the foundation and the commission. Sorry, I just got off a plane. What we advocate for yearly is the budget, because San Diego vastly underfunds its library system. So every year at budget time, which we're just about to come up to, we get together and we rattle all the cages we can to make sure we get as much funding for the library every year as is possible. And yeah, the relationship between a Friends organization and a foundation can be tricky, because the foundation, at least in San Diego, the foundation is looking system-wide. We have 36 branches. They're looking system-wide, and Friends tend to be, we have an overarching Friends organization that kind of is the basis of the 501c3, but we have lots of little, every branch has a chapter of Friends, and most of those are under the same 501c3. So we call this the Greater Friends, and that's the board I'm on. But the Friends tend to be fairly hyperlocal to their branch, except there's this, or so getting all these groups to come together and have the Friends not feel like the foundation is coming in and stealing their thunder, if you will. That's been a real it's been a real relationship that has taken a lot to build. So anyway, what we're not doing yet as effectively as I would like is working at the state and federal levels. We're doing some there, but it's mostly one-offs. So
based on what you've heard so far in today's conversation, do you see any opportunities you could pursue as a result of this conversation that would get you toward the state level?
Oh, certainly. I have been so focused in my little 8th largest city in the US that I have not really paid attention to other organizations in the state. And yeah, no, this CPLA sounds like a fabulous thing. I want to get more involved.
I would love to talk to you, Pat.
Yeah.
You see how this
Well,
happens?
that's
This
right.
is what it's all about. You
it's
wrote people and
great.
said, hey, let's talk a little bit about this. You lay the stuff out on the table as concisely as you can, keeping the stories flowing, because the stories are at the heart of what we do and what motivates us. And by the time you end, if you're really smart about this, you're either direct messaging behind the scenes in the session, what's your email address? How do I reach you? Or you've copied down the things that we've been putting into chat saying, here's the session's website. Or you contact us at CLA and say, hey, who was that person you had the other day? I'd like to go to them. But that's really where it starts, and it gets to the heart of our whole session today. I also want to point out something that I think Pat said pretty explicitly, but if you missed it, notice she's on a couple different organizations interacting. And that puts her in a very interesting position, which I think is true of where Tom sits, where I know it's true of where Deborah sits because of her affiliations with CLA, with the organization she's representing today, with ALA. And if we have any other Asian that I'm missing, Deborah, go ahead and put those in now. But we can be those conduits between organizations, and each one of us brings a unique set of networking opportunities where if we use this effectively, we are stronger together. The fabulous book that came out 10, 15 years ago by Franz Johansson is called The Medici Effect. Taken to its essence, Johansson in that book talks about how people from all over the world would meet at certain places. His opening example in the book was merchant marines, who obviously, by definition, were sailing all over the world. They would meet in pubs, and the example he was given, I think, was somewhere in Greece, where people from all over the world would meet at the pub. They'd talk, they'd share ideas, but the magic was when they got back on their ships and went elsewhere, they disseminated their ideas, and that's how things grew. And what Pat said explicitly, and what Tom and Deborah are talking about, and I'm pointing out here, is we can create our own Medici effect for advocates by saying, who do we talk to? What are the ideas we're hearing that are worth sharing? You know, we're back to the old TED Talks, ideas worth sharing and spreading ideas. But that's the foundation of this. It's not a mechanical thing. It's a person-to-person kind of opportunity to identify where the opportunities are, what we as individuals can do, and recognize that the old cliche about an individual can make a difference is far more than a tired old cliche. It's the heart of what we do in advocacy. Tom, we get a response. There we go, a response.
It's not just that one meeting. It's not just the one meeting. It's consistently following up. If you just talk to the legislator, the legislative staff, or you just talk to your friends once a year, that's great, but that's not enough. That is it. This is all about building relationships that last forever, that last for a long time, and we train the next generation to do it. And I think that we have neglected to do that in the California library world. And that is one of the things that the Ursula Meyer programs are trying to do. We're really trying to make sure that people understand how critical this is. It doesn't matter how much, how much you do the work at the library, how much you focus on that library. If it doesn't continue, if it doesn't get the funding, you're going to have a real problem.
Tom?
Yeah, I have a a challenge in a sense, and also a comment about this international issue. One of the challenges as librarians is that we have a job, and we do that job, and it takes a lot of time, and we never have enough time, and there's always things that we neglect, and so forth and so on. And advocacy is part of that job, but it's not the job. And so the challenge to me always was, okay, where do I find the time? Where do I, how do I actually do that? We obviously in schools, we can talk to parents, we can talk to the administration, we can talk to the school board. We need to make our presence felt in all those places. But sometimes, we don't have the energy to, go and, do that sort of thing, or we don't feel like have the energy. Where do we find that energy? Sometimes where we find that energy is with meeting with other people, with, I know in Marin County, we had a group of librarians that met regularly, school librarians. And so we would share, what was going on in our various libraries and how we were able or not able to get, funding. And okay, you try this strategy and we try that strategy and so forth. I mean, I was very lucky in that case because I didn't really have to do too much in my position, but plenty of other people did have to do things. So the energy that comes from other people is extremely important in our work. It's very easy to me to to neglect this side of things if things are going okay, and you have to kind of remind yourself that it isn't always going to be this way. The other thing that, always struck me, I always had the attitude that I was doing a good job and that I wasn't worried about, losing my job or things being taken away from me. And that wasn't true necessarily with all the librarians. So I think a positive sort of attitude also helps, or frame of mind, with just getting through the day-to-day, sort of stuff that we have to do. And, making sure that you're providing the services that, the public and the legislators and the, various people want you to provide is extremely important, no matter at what cost. The thing about the international side of things, I belong for many years, I'm still a member of the International Association of School Librarianship. And they meet all over the world. It's one way I've been able to see many places that I wouldn't otherwise. They actually during the pandemic, of course, the meetings went online, and that was okay, but I still prefer to meet face to face with people. And I was a part of that organization while I was working in Marin County, and then for about 10 years, and then over 10 years since I've retired, I've kept being involved because number one, I like the people and I like going different places, but also it gives me an opportunity to see how what school libraries are like in other places. And it's kind of fascinating. There are many, many similarities, of course, and there are many countries where, poor countries where you see the challenges that people have with, getting resources, getting staffing, all this sort of thing. There are other places where it's much, people are much better off and so forth. But basically, we're kind of all in the same boat, and we're all kind of, helping each other see that, we're all trying to, basically give students and staff the materials that they need to succeed in their school life. And they're basically the same every place. Sometimes there's some interesting things, though, that go on that we, don't think about necessarily here. The other way that, I was always involved was in this national organization, the American Association of School Librarianship. And I've been to several of their meetings as well. So you get energy from being with other people, from seeing what people are doing. And it can be challenging to do that because, you have your job, you have your family, you have your life, and and here's something else that, you can put on top of that. As I said, one of the nice things about the International Association is that I have gotten to see many different places that I probably wouldn't otherwise. Farthest I went was to Durban, South Africa, one year, and but I've been to many other places as well. So that's been a wonderful, part of my career.
Thanks, Tom. And to wrap a little bit of what Deborah and Tom said back into that whole idea of the Medici effect and coming together, sharing ideas, and then disseminating those ideas, you're seeing that the groups that we were focusing on today and are focusing on extend our reach into other organizations. As Tom said, sometimes through national and international travel. I found myself as somebody who's deeply involved in adult learning and lifelong learning, that I get better as a trainer by going to conferences, not only for trainers, but in other subjects that I work with. I've been involved with consultants and educators at the higher education level, looking at how we might reframe education to make it more successful and more responsive to the learning needs of contemporary learners, rather than those we picture 100 years ago that we still seem to be training in our outdated forms of education. But it's always broadening ourselves out. And it starts with us saying, who do we know that can open those doors? That's a question to ask ourselves. And that's why we're spending so much time today saying, here are some people that can open those doors for you. And as we talk to you as co-conspirators in this, those of you on the live session, as well as those of you catching this later in an archive version, the invitation is there. Remember, we strive to be accessible. If you're involved at all in California Library Association, you know, every year, usually in May or June, we get together. And this year, 2023, we'll be in Sacramento, and we will be doing things with the Ursula Meyer's group. Will have its usual half-day workshop on advocacy basics. That'll be on Thursday. I believe it's 9 to noon, but check the schedule if you're interested. We love having you come to those because you're part of that training group. You help us to see what you need, and together we walk out of those stronger. I'll be doing a couple of sessions at that will focus in on some of the more specific parts of advocacy, and we continue to do these sessions and make them available. Again, can't mention often enough, if you're interested in how to write an advocacy pitch, we've got sessions already available to you free of charge on the YouTube channel through CLA. If you want to know how every library works and how Patrick Sweeney, who's involved in that, works, you can go back to the 2 sessions we've had Patrick do for these things. We've actually done reduced versions of the advocacy basics, and we're about ready to do that again later this year through Ursula Meyer's bringing in some new speakers. It will not be the 3-hour version that you get at CLA, but it'll get you some basics so that you can dive into that as a learner working at your own pace, take what you need from it, and then disseminate that and reach out to some of the people there. But the big takeaway today is, do not think that this is the only chance you get to see or hear us, which might be to your benefit or it might be a frightening thought. But if you want to hear more, reach out to us. We're pretty accessible. We're not hiding under parsley in a steakhouse. We're out there saying, we need you and we want to work with you.
And if you have tips,
Yeah.
we would love to hear things that have worked for your groups as well. You know, one of the things that sometimes I think we don't do as much work with, we could be working more with CSAC, which is the California State Association of Counties. We could be working with Cal Cities. There are, you know, there are all kinds of organizations. We're having an interesting conversation in Sonoma about policies about what posters to put up in the library. And so we're going to try to organize a community conversation with churches, with education folks, just a community conversation so that in California, we don't have people screaming at the school board meetings and screaming at the library board meetings, because we've had the conversations out in the community, and we've heard what the community has to say. Some people in the legislative world have suggested that that they're legislative managers and they have groups. So if you want a piece of legislation that's worked on, you know, talk to the people who are actually on the staff of the legislators rather than the legislators. But everybody is interested in politics, it seems, at the moment, and chances are, if you're at the grocery store and you wear your librarian badge, or you wear your library commissioner badge or your school library badge, someone will say, oh, you know, I'm interested in that.
Thomas just dropped something into the chat to keep the spirit of the conversation going. If you want to contact Tom or his colleagues at CSLA, the site is csla.net. And he's saying, click on the advocate button. That'll get you your introductory message saying, hey, we're interested in you. We want to work with you. Tom, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've recently revamped our webpage, and I'm not all that excited about it, but anyway, one thing there is a huge button that says advocate. So I know that that's there, and that'll take you to what the projects we're currently working on, and some in conjunction with CLA. And so you can kind of find out, you know, what we're working on as an organization. Let's see, there was something else I was going to say, and I'll think of it in a minute.
That's fine. What I would say, kind of as a tongue-in-cheek thing, Tom, meet more of these school librarians out there. School librarians, meet Tom. You guys need to be talking more. This is where we're going to get things happening. Chris,
okay, well, let me just say one thing that I sometimes think that people, professionals or others, think, well, I'm really not that important, or I don't know enough about, what to do or whatever, and then don't reach out, don't get involved. And one of the things I really suggest is that the leaders of organizations encourage as much as possible the people who are either they're working with or working under them or whatever, to get involved. Because I know, early on in my career, here I am, what do I know? And it takes a while to sort of realize, oh, quite a bit. I mean, you can say something too. You're important also. And depending on your personality, that can be more or less difficult. So what I encourage us all to do is, as much as possible with the limited time that we have, to get involved in any way that you possibly can. I mean, it doesn't matter, how exactly you get involved. And don't be afraid to speak up, and don't be afraid to advocate for whatever your interest is.
Thank you, Tom. And again, circling back to the idea that if there is more that you want to know about this stuff, just reach out to us and we can do this. Chris, we haven't had a chance to talk to you too much in the call. Is there anything you want to talk about in terms of things you have done with advocacy, connecting groups together, or benefiting from a collaboration with a group?
No, I'm just here to listen. Right now I feel like I have so much on my plate and budget, and we have a great foundation that joined with our friends a number of years ago that does fundraising. I guess I'm, just trying to figure out maybe how to get my board more involved too. They're advisory for the city, but, trying to mesh them, and they are starting to work together, which is great. But that I have you guys as resources too. If I have questions, it's wonderful. And I know I'm pretty much more at a lower level, local level, working more than at a bigger level, but it's nice to know that those resources are out there. So
local levels where it starts for so many of us. Deborah, I know you've had a lot of experience as a volunteer, serving in the trenches, literally, as well as serving on boards. What tips might you offer Chris in terms of how to get that level of engagement that she's talking about working on right now?
I think COVID sort of backed us all up a little bit, and I think we are the Sonoma County library system is having a volunteer appreciation lunch this week or next week, and we've got a speaker, and we've got speeches, and we're doing all kinds of things, and it's the first time that people have been really together in such a long time. And I think that the step is bringing them together, but also letting them know what the future, if you've got a strategic plan, they should know about that. If you've got if they can help, they should know about that. If they're just giving money to buy bookmarks for the books and the branches, perhaps there's something more that the funding that they develop, perhaps there's something else they can be doing in your long-term goals. And also sometimes we don't know who they know. So
yes.
it's always a great idea to, especially the people who kind of come in and are very quiet and sorting the books or whatever, but they may know legislators, they may know the people who are on the city council staff. And so just getting together and getting that information, it's like, what do you have to know about a legislator? It's just developing those relationships, and then they feel better as a volunteer because they know that they're really making a difference. While the book sorting is of course very important, if they can help you with a larger, significant long-term problem and solve it with you, man, they love that. They love that. And I think that you're also not alone over in the valley. You know, maybe we should have a regional, I'm now I'm local here, but maybe we should have a regional gathering. I know the North Bay folks, I know you gather, but maybe we should have a regional gathering of friends and trustees or something like that, so that we think about what's going on in the North Bay. And then you also then, when you find really exciting information, those are the times when you invite a legislator or the staff member into the library. You know, legislators, they love coming to the library and reading a story because nobody yells at them. And there's a photo opportunity, and you can put it in your newsletter, and you can send it to them, and you can, you know, write an article to the American Library Association, or send it to the California Library Association, or whatever. So they need to know what we're doing. A lot of them don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we have great stories to tell. And if we had a little bit more money, we'd do even more. So it's making sure that they know what's going on. And that's the fun part. I like that. That's the fun part. So
I've seen so much of that over the years on Facebook, on Twitter, and some of the other social media engines, and taking a whole course down to its essence. If you're going to use social media effectively to work with your board, work with your community, you don't just say, this is what we did last night, this is what we're doing tomorrow. You show those photographs of people interacting with each other. You embed in your posts an invitation to interact. If you've talked about something that happened last night, you say, we want to do this for the community. What's your story? They're giving you those stories. They're doing your work for you and making
That's
you
right.
be an advocate. We overlook that. Same thing
That's
I saw
right.
when I ran volunteer services for the San Francisco Public Library. The real action there was not my saying, I need 20 people to shelve books. The real action was saying, the library is looking for volunteers. We have these positions and others. Come in and let's talk. I maintain to this day, the most important thing I ever did with volunteers, and I did it with everyone who made it into the system, was I would sit with them one-on-one for an hour just to talk and see what their interests were. If they were testing for something like shelving books, we'd run that test during that session. But it was always, what do you really want to do? And if they came up with something that we weren't doing and we needed, we expanded the program that way. This is what we do with our board members in some of the organizations I'm with. New board member comes in, I ask them, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? And if they've got something we haven't thought of and we have the resources, we expand and the community benefits.
Right. And then,
That's-
for example, the San Francisco Public Library, the Friends, they do a library laureates, and they're doing that again this year, and inviting, you know, fabulous authors, and it's an opportunity for, and people who have been on the staff who are now authors, and, you know, so it's a way to acknowledge the people who create the books that, you know, that libraries occasionally revolve around. But it also is a wonderful opportunity for people who love libraries to come together and tell each other at a table why they do. And, you know, and it's just so, one of the things that CPLA does, and we're doing it in Sacramento, we give awards to trustees or librarians or media people or something like that who really have had an impact on libraries. And it is such a always a feel good time. So if you have if you have people that you want to nominate, you know, we'll be sending out the invitation. But it is such a it's such a feel good event, and it's so inspirational to all of us to think, oh wow, they can do that in a tiny library like that. What can we do if we, you know, what can we do with our resources, and what can we do if we have more resources, and how can we tell people about it? That's the thing. And what we don't do is we don't brag enough. We're polite and we don't brag. Okay, so let's not be polite and let's brag.
CSLA also gives an advocacy award every year.
Oh, that's
And
good.
actually, our group, FOPSL, won it one year, and the Friends of the Oakland Public School Libraries. And we also give each year an award to like an administrator of the year. So either, you know, superintendent or a principal or somebody who's been particularly supportive of libraries. So CSLA also, you know, does that kind of thing. And of course, then people can go and use those any way they want. You know, they can put them on their wall, or they can, you know, do whatever they want. So that's important too, I think.
Let's take this about 5 miles further down the road than most of us ever go. Great colleague of mine from the Association for Talent Development. His name is Howard Prager, Praeger. Howard wrote the most lovely book a couple of years ago. It's simply called Make Someone's Day. Howard's book tells story after story about how somebody's saying to somebody else, you made my day, two people's days, the person that heard that and the person that said it, because you cannot help but be lifted when you get that smile back from somebody, wow, I made your day. We need to do that. And I love what Deborah and Tom are saying in terms of the acknowledgements and the awards given. But it's something Deborah and I worked on very closely when she was a volunteer at San Francisco Public and I was running that program. I made sure I was out there talking to the different volunteers, seeing what was going on, talking to their managers to see what was happening that was good, bad, and ugly. And anytime I heard a good story about a volunteer, I'd take the time to walk over to them and say, you know, you made this person's day, in my own words rather than Howard's, but you made someone's day by doing this thing on this day, and this is the difference it made. And that's something we need to be doing with our groups. If we are constantly reminding people how important they are to us and reminding them of the impact that their work has, we're building those long-term relationships that Deborah and Tom so eloquently talked about at the beginning of the session. It's not just, I need your dollars now, or I need you to sign this petition. It's, let's talk now about our shared love of whatever it is we're advocating for. And let's build a relationship on that. So when the time comes that you need that ballot measure moved, or you need funding in place, that you've got your constituency there and you're growing it more as a result of having built those relationships before. Gives us a great chance to move into something that Deborah and Tom both wanted to make sure we covered at least at some level today, and that's advocacy and funding and collaboration in groups. Deborah, you wanted to get into that. Why don't you define where we can go with that, and let's see where that takes us.
The relationships that you build as an advocate are exactly the kind of relationships that you need to build with possible donors. And so if you have the storyline, if you have this is what we want to do in the next year, this is what we want to do in the next 5 years, this is what an amazing thing that we could do if we got some major funds, if we got a major donation, if we got a major grant. And those kinds of conversations, you always need to know what, if you were in an elevator with someone who said, what would you do with $1 million for your library? You need to be able to say, this is what we would do. Or if your libraries are smaller and you think that there's no possibility of $1 million grant, that's fine. But you need to think about, what if you ran into someone who actually could do that? And then once you have that in your mind, then everybody's a possible donor. And so that vision of yours is something that is just part of your lexicon. It's part of what the staff knows. It's part of what the friends know. You know, these are some of the things. These are some of the big, hairy, audacious goals that we are looking for in the future. And it will inform all of the conversations that you have. But donors are incredibly important because they can be, but you have to know what they want. You know, someone used to tell the story of a Republican assemblyman whose father was deaf. And so he was, they didn't think that he was ever likely to support funding for libraries, but because there were services for the deaf in libraries, he was a passionate supporter. And those are the kind of conversations you need to have. You need to know that about legislators. You need to know that about the people who are on your boards. You need to know that so that you can then move the conversation along. Because I firmly believe that advocacy and fundraising are they're the same thing. They're just asking for different things. Does that make sense? Same thing, different things?
Makes a lot of sense. Tom?
I think it's a slightly different when it comes to schools. We don't really fundraise per se, but I do think that certainly in those school districts which are fortunate enough to have some sort of outside funding, in other words, aside from the state funding, and that is generally better off districts. Every year that I was the librarian at my school, I went to our foundation, the local school support foundation, and had plenty of things to ask for in terms of funding. So having something like Deborah said is absolutely essential. we all need something, and coming up with a good proposal, good argument for why we need that particular thing, just having that kind of ready when the time comes is absolutely essential. One thing I will mention, Deborah came and did a presentation for our library commission in Richmond earlier this year. I'd been on the commission for about a year at that point, and I was still struggling to figure out, okay, what the hell are we supposed to be doing here? And fortunately, she and Melinda helped us to kind of, visualize, what the possibilities were. We're an advisory board, so we advise the city council. And recently, we had a change in administration, a new mayor and new city council. And the person who is now the liaison from the city council to the library commission came to a meeting last month. And she happened to mention that as a young woman, she worked for ALA in Chicago. So, of course, this was a surprise to me. I've known her for many, many years. She was the mayor for quite a while. But it was a surprise to find out. And, in other places, I've been to legislator meetings and found out, oh, my mother was a librarian, or my sister is a librarian, or, all those sorts of things, which is great. But the point is, then, okay, how to leverage that into some kind of action. So, okay, that's fine. That's wonderful. I'm glad that, that you know what a library is and what have you. But then what do we do with that? Then what do we, as commission members, for example, do with that in order to, encourage that person to, on the council, vote for something that will benefit the library. And that's the thing that, these little wedges, that get us into a person's kind of life in such a way that we can say, okay, now, well, thank you, that's great, but here's something we'd like you to do. The importance of libraries. Let's use it to further the program of the library and the mission of the library.
Thanks. Deborah had also wanted to call attention to the fact that as we do this recording today, April of 2023, we're in the middle of budget season. For anybody watching this from outside of the state of California, let me define that process for you in the most simple of terms. This is when all the legislators in California go to the top of the state capitol in Sacramento with bags of money. They stand up there and they toss money off the top of the Capitol dome. People walk away and they go, wow, I can go do the program I want. Don't you wish it were like that? Deborah, budget season, really, what are we looking at, and how can people use affiliation with associations like the ones we're talking about today to really make a difference?
This is the time that you send your emails, you make your telephone calls. The legislators are home. The federal legislators are home. They're having lots of town halls. The state assembly people kind of come in and out of town. Make sure that you know who your legislators are, and that you regularly send to them. If they're not on your newsletter, put them on your newsletter. If you haven't ever given them a tour of your library, make sure they get a tour of their library. But make sure that you talk to, I would say quarterly. I would say, talk to them at budget season and say, this is what we're doing and this is what we could do with more. Even though at the federal level, the House is going to be less cooperative, but it's an ongoing process. In California, just make sure that you not only do you talk to them at the budget season, you make sure that you know what the state library is doing, because our state librarian is very plugged in and is being he's very knowledgeable about what's possible, what's not possible. But make sure that you invite them to the library. Make sure do it quarterly. Make sure that they know if you've got a specialty, if you've got some veterans resources going on, if their staff doesn't know that, make sure that their local staff gets invited, because sometimes the staff is much more, it's much better to know the staff than it is to actually know the legislator sometimes. And the local staff then sometimes gets transferred up to the Sacramento staff if you're working with the state legislators. So know as many people as you can, make sure that they know about you. And if they need something, they will call you because you are a resource. How many people do you serve? When does your newsletter go out? Just make sure that they know that. You're not trying to be pushy, but you're also trying to make them know that you're a resource that needs to be funded so that you can continue to be a resource for them and their voters.
If you're a member of California Library Association, why would you not want to be? Look at what we're doing.
Right.
If you remember, you have a conduit right to our advocacy and legislation committee where we've got our lobbyists working with us, where we look at these things on a monthly basis, where we routinely talk to people in other organizations, which is why people like Tom and Deborah are there, not only CLA members, but letting us know what their organizations are doing and letting us know what we're doing, letting them know what we're doing so that we can collaborate where it makes sense. These are easy starting points for you. Again, Tom's talked about going to the advocacy button on their websites. Go to the California Library Association website, and one of the 4 or 5 big things you see on the home page there is a whole button leading you to things about advocacy, telling you about the committee, whole page of resources we put together for you, some links to things that will help you if you want to do your own self-guided course in terms of advocacy, like how to write a letter to your legislator, how to reach out to some of your community members, so many of the other topics we've talked about. So we're all doing this and we're all benefiting from it. As we draw down to the final part of this session, let us do 2 things here. First of all, let's identify some of the things you do not want to do. Deborah and or Tom, what are things, mistakes you've seen made by advocates or mistakes you've made yourself that you would say, please don't do this because it's not going to work out for you?
Don't be angry. Don't be angry. We provide an amazing service. And so I think anger does not serve you well in an advocacy session. It's also nice to balance off we don't have money to do this, and so give us the money. As I said before, it's good to balance that off with this is the fabulous stuff that we do with the funding that we have now.
Yeah, when I looked at this question, I wrote down, assuming people know our needs. So we know, people have an idea of what a library is. Libraries have changed over the, past however many years and radically in some ways, not so radically in others, but people don't necessarily know what libraries are doing these days, or what resources they're using, or what tools they're using, that sort of thing. And so it's a mistake to make assumptions about what people know. Just because your mother was a school librarian doesn't mean you know what a school library does these days. So making sure that we're providing kind of an education to people that we want to influence, and making sure that they understand that things are changing, things are a lot different. Libraries can't just be done away with because of the internet. That's a favorite sort of old saw that's been around for a while. But many school people kind of make these kinds of assumptions. So just assuming that people know what your needs are in terms of a library program, especially in terms of schools. The definition of a school librarian, or as we call them in California, teacher librarian, is not the same as a paraprofessional or clerk running a library. Teacher librarians have the word teacher in the description, and they are teachers. So they can do things that a clerk can't do. And so, any of this sort of thing, I think, is very important not to forget that we sometimes need to educate people, let people know, what we're doing, what we're all about, what kind of services we provide, and how we provide them.
Tom is talking about the larger issues. I will also say that follow up. If you meet with a legislator, if you meet with a staff member, follow up. And if you do have a handout, don't make it 19 pages because it will go in the round file. Make it brief, make sure that they know what you're asking for, and continue to follow up. Just it can't just be the one shot, because then they will know that you're not serious.
For someone who works a lot on facilitating conversations and collaborations among the various groups I've worked with, I want to emphasize that I think one of the big mistakes we always make is just walking in and saying, here's what I need, and trying to build a big case for it with lots of statistics and lots of charts, which of course puts everybody to sleep and is forgotten about half a minute before you walk out of the office. What I really love about the beginnings of collaboration is you walk in and you ask the other person what's important to them, what they're trying to do, and you look for the things that you are also trying to do. And that moment when you can say, we're interested in that too, is the open door to a conversation that creates a kind of lifelong collaboration that we really need in terms of libraries. I'll switch gears a little bit and say, in terms of what Tom and Deborah were just saying, that it's stunning to me, because I work so much with training and lifelong learning, that some of the people I would assume would be the greatest library advocates don't even know what libraries look like anymore. And I've gotten quite a reputation among the friends that I still have left, because I always do this to them. When they visit me from out of town and we're walking around town, I will routinely make sure we stop into a branch library or the main library for a few minutes so they can see what's in there. And invariably, these wonderful trainers who are helping to educate your peers say, I didn't know libraries did that. And we need to get better at that. We need to be those kind of people that will still hang on to friends, even though we drag them into libraries. We want to be the kind of friends that people hang on to because we pull them into libraries and we show them what magnificent opportunities are there, and show that libraries are not book warehouses. I mean, these old canards about, oh yeah, they used to be book warehouses, now there's something else. Great libraries have always been community meeting places, been places where information meets people and people meet information and needs are met. We're seeing that continue to evolve, and the more we can do to be that friend who says, been in the local library, let me show you something here, and know your person well enough to know what's going to stun them in the most positive of ways when they walk in and say, I didn't know that was there. I want to come back. I wonder if my library in Kansas or my library in Minnesota or wherever they're coming from does that. That's how we spread the advocacy that we're trying to do here. And we reach out to other organizations as well as other peers. We need to be doing more of that. For those of you watching the archive version, a great exercise at this point would be to answer for yourself the question, what will I do differently as a result of having spent the time watching this and listening to these conversations? What will I do differently in the next week or two? Sub-questions would be, who will you contact for your advocacy? Who will make that contact? Is it going to be you or somebody else? Who knows the person you need to get to? Deborah, I believe it was earlier, who talked about being in that elevator, and she's referring to that whole concept of the elevator speech. You have 3 or 4 floors and it's a fast moving elevator. What do you say quickly to get the other person's attention? So a question for you is, what is your 2-sentence description of what you want to achieve through the proposed collaboration you're doing with one of the groups you've looked at today or any other group? What are you offering your prospective partner? That comes back to what I said a few minutes ago. Collaboration isn't my saying, I need this from you. It's my saying, what are you interested in? Oh, I'm interested in that too. If we work together, what might we accomplish? That's that moment when things just explode in the most positive of ways. And finally, as a trainer, I always say, how do we know that the person learned what they wanted? Or how do we know that we accomplished things? So your final question would be, how will you confirm that the collaboration has been successful for you and your proposed partner? That ties back to what you asked for up front. And if you get it, how did you get it? And did it pay off for everybody? You want positive results. I love what Deborah said. I've never quite heard that in response to what did we do wrong? And she says, don't be angry. Be positive. If you leave today's session with anything positive, I hope it's the idea that positivity is what drives us. It's our gold in the bank. It's what makes collaboration possible and fun and enjoyable. And that's what we want to go for. We're almost at the end mark here. Deborah and Tom, any last words of wisdom you want to leave people, or words of encouragement in terms of them reaching you in your organization or reaching any organization that would benefit their community?
We're here to help. And as we look around the country, there are a lot of libraries that are We are lucky in California, I will say. We're lucky in California. And we may not be lucky for a lot longer. So we need to learn how to work together. We need to be willing to work together. And so you've got larger groups in California that can help. CPLA, CLA, and then also the National Libraries, ALA, United for Libraries. We're there to help. If you have a question, ask Paul. You can always find Paul. You can always look on the CLA website, ask a board member. We're there to help. Come to the CPLA website. We want to come out and talk to you. We want to help. We want to help with regional conversations. You're not alone.
Thank you. And yes, Deborah's absolutely right. If you can't find me on the internet, I'm doing something wrong.
I know, right?
I'm going to say about it. Tom, last words from you.
Yeah, so CSLA and CLA, as far as advocacy goes, share a lot of the same issues, the same problems, the same challenges. One thing I would encourage is all you public librarians out there and public library people, find out more about your local school libraries. Find out whether they're working, find out whether they exist, find out who staffs them, find out, and then if you can, get involved. I mean, it's really, it can't just be, the practitioners themselves who advocate for things. It's got to be the general public and citizens, interested people. So I would just suggest take a look at our webpage, csla.net, and click on that advocate button, and you'll see what we're doing. Can you help? Well, yeah, probably. And that's the organization itself. But then everybody lives in a school district, and everybody should be aware of what's going on in that school district, and see what the issues and problems are there. Be willing to encourage where good things are being done, and to change things where things aren't so great.
Tom, thank you, Deborah. Thank you for the people that participated in today's session. Reminder that we do this on the second Wednesday of each month, 10 a.m., usually 10 to 11 or 10:30, depending on the depth of the topic we want to dive into. We're hoping next month to return to a theme we haven't talked about in a while, which is the legislative agenda from California Library Association. So watch for notices of that in the next week or so when we've confirmed our panel, and we'll see you there. We'll see you at the CLA conference, and we'll see you as often as we can see you. Once the recording stops, those of you on the call, if you want to hang for a quick debrief, you're welcome to do that. Karen, you can cut the recording. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.